The rain was falling in thin silver threads, each drop tracing the glass in trembling lines. Daniel Cross stood in the doorway of his apartment, one hand braced on the frame, his knuckles white. Across from him, Maya Reyes was clutching the strap of her worn canvas bag, her chest rising and falling to fast, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Her voice was low, trembling not from weakness, but from a truth that felt like it had been festering for far too long. "You betrayed me, Daniel." The words hit him harder than if she'd screamed them. Quiet could cut deeper than shouting, and in that moment, it sliced through every carefully built wall he'd ever constructed around himself. His throat tightened, but pride, always his worst habit, kept him from reaching for her. Maya's hand lingered on the strap for a heartbeat longer, as though she was giving him one last chance to say something that might anchor her there. But Daniel said nothing, not because he didn't care, he cared too much, but because in his mind, explanations were just another form of weakness, and weakness was a language he'd sworn not to speak. She stepped back, her hair catching the hallway light like a final flicker before darkness. Her boots splashed in the shallow puddles outside, the sound fading with each step until all he could hear was the rain. That night, Daniel stayed awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, the taste of her words still bitter on his tongue. He told himself she'd come back when she realized she'd misunderstood, when time softened the sharp edges of her anger. But days became weeks, weeks became months, and then the silence stretched into years. 3 years. In those years, Daniel poured himself into his work with a ferocity that even his colleagues found unsettling. He designed buildings that won awards, negotiated contracts that broke records, and polished his reputation until there wasn't a crack visible to the outside world. To anyone looking in, Daniel Cross was the picture of discipline and success. But at night, in the quiet, there were cracks. They came in the form of memories. The way Maya would hum under her breath when she painted. The way she could make coffee taste like comfort. The way she could challenge him without ever raising her voice. These memories didn't fade, they sharpened. And with every passing year, he wondered if the choice he made that night had cost him something he could never rebuild. It was a Tuesday morning when the past came knocking. Daniel had just left a meeting downtown, his phone in one hand, reviewing notes as he crossed the plaza outside his firm's headquarters. The city was in that late winter limbo where the air smelled faintly of rain, and the sky couldn't decide if it wanted to be gray or blue. People hurried past him, their lives moving in quick, practiced rhythms. He almost didn't see her. She was standing at the edge of the plaza, a scarf wrapped loosely around her neck, her hair a little shorter than he remembered but still catching the light in that way that made him think of the first day they met. She wasn't alone. 2 small children stood on either side of her, one with a sketchbook clutched tightly to their chest, the other gripping her hand as if it were the only thing tethering them to the ground. For a moment, Daniel forgot how to breathe. The noise of the plaza faded until all he could hear was the rush of his own heartbeat. He didn't move, couldn't. His mind scrambled for explanations that made sense, but every possibility carried the same weight. She was back, and she had not come back the same. Maya's gaze found his. There was no anger in it, not the fire he'd braced himself for if this moment ever came, but there wasn't softness either. Her eyes held something else entirely, strength. He took one step forward before realizing he had no idea what he'd say if he reached her. How do you speak to someone whose absence had been a shadow over every part of your life? How do you address the 2 small faces watching you with curiosity, their eyes flicking between you and the woman who once walked away without looking back? The city moved around them as though nothing was happening. But for Daniel, the world had narrowed to a single point, the space between him and Maya Reyes. "Daniel." Her voice was steady, almost too steady. "We need to talk." It wasn't an invitation, it was a decision already made. And in that instant, every achievement, every carefully guarded piece of his life, every sleepless night replaying her last words, none of it mattered. Because she was here, and she wasn't alone. Daniel's hand tightened around his phone, his mind racing ahead, trying to map out what this conversation could bring. But somewhere deep down, he knew no amount of planning could prepare him for the truth she was about to tell. He swallowed, nodded once, and followed her. The rain had stopped. But the air felt heavier than before. Somewhere, he had the sense that this wasn't just a conversation. It was the beginning of something that would unravel every certainty he had left. And Daniel Cross was not a man who liked uncertainty, but he was about to learn that sometimes the very thing you fear most is the only thing that can save you. The cafe Maya chose was tucked into a quiet corner of the city, far from the glass towers and rushing suits Daniel called his second home. It was the kind of place where sunlight filtered through tall windows, catching in the steam that curled up from chipped ceramic mugs. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and something freshly baked, and the low hum of conversation felt like background music from another life. Daniel stepped inside and was hit by the oddest sensation, like walking into someone's memory. He'd been here once, years ago, with her. They had shared a pot of tea neither of them really liked, just to stay out of the rain. Now, the rain was gone, but the heaviness in his chest made it feel like a storm had followed him in. Maya sat at a small table near the back, the two children with her. The older one, maybe 7, was bent over a sketchpad, his brow furrowed in the kind of concentration Daniel recognized he'd worn that same expression while drafting blueprints at 2 in the morning. The younger, perhaps 5, had both hands wrapped around a mug of warm milk, blowing on it like it might reveal a secret if cooled just right. She didn't stand when he approached. She just looked up at him with that same steady gaze from the plaza, the kind that left no space for pretense. "Sit," she said simply. Daniel obeyed. The chair creaked faintly under him, or maybe it was just his nerves. For a long moment, no one spoke. The children seemed content in their own small worlds, but Daniel could feel their awareness of him to sets of eyes, cautious yet curious. "They're beautiful," he said finally, his voice lower than he intended. Maya's fingers tightened around her cup, but she didn't smile. "Their names are Noah and Ela." She glanced briefly at them, then back at him. "They're my whole world." Daniel's mind scrambled for a way to ask the questions clawing at him, without shattering whatever fragile civility they had managed to hold onto, and he hesitated, forcing his voice to remain even. "Why are you here now?" She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable, because they deserved to know the truth. The words sat between them like a fragile piece of glass. He didn't dare touch them yet, afraid they might cut to deep. Maya took a slow breath, as if steadying herself against the tide of memories. "The night I left, I thought I'd never see you again. I wasn't planning to, but life has a way of forcing you to face the things you run from. I ran to protect myself, to protect them." Daniel blinked. "Them? They weren't even." He stopped himself, his eyes flicking to the children. "They existed the moment I found out," she said quietly. "And that was the same week I found out about her." The air in his lungs turned heavy. "There was no her," he said, sharper than he intended. "I know what I saw, Daniel." Her voice was still calm, but there was an edge beneath it, a memory that still carried heat. "I saw you with someone else. I saw the way you looked at her, the way she looked at you." He shook his head. It wasn't, but the truth caught in his throat, even if it wasn't what she thought. He had never tried to explain back then. He'd let her leave without a fight. Noah looked up from his sketchpad, glancing between them. "Mom?" Maya's expression softened instantly as she turned to him. "It's okay, sweetheart. Why don't you show Mr. Cross your drawing?" The boy hesitated, then slid the pad across the table. Daniel's breath caught when he saw the sketch, a tall building with clean, precise lines, every window perfectly placed. It was one of his own designs, the Avery Plaza project, rendered in pencil by a child's hand. "You drew this?" Daniel asked. Noah nodded shyly. "I saw it in a magazine. Mom said you made it." For the first time since she'd walked back into his life, Maya's gaze faltered. "They know you're an architect. They've seen your work. I wanted them to know the good parts of you." Daniel looked at her then, really looked at her. She was different, stronger somehow, more sure of herself, but there was still something familiar in the way she shielded those children, as if the world was full of sharp corners she alone could soften. "You could have told me," he said, his voice quieter now. "You could have given me the chance. I gave you chances, Daniel." She interrupted, not unkindly. "More than you probably realize. That night, all I needed was for you to tell me the truth, to fight for me." But you didn't. So I fought for myself. Silence settled again, thicker this time. Hila leaned toward her mother and whispered something Daniel couldn't hear. Maya smiled faintly, then turned back to him. We're not here to reopen old wounds. We're here because I've decided they should know you. But if you want to be in their lives, you'll have to earn it. Not for me, for them. Daniel felt the weight of those words sink into him. It wasn't a door swinging open, it was a challenge, a gauntlet thrown. He looked at Noah, still bent over his sketchpad, and Hila, her small fingers tracing patterns on her mug. Something inside him shifted. He wasn't sure yet what it meant, but he knew one thing with certainty. He wasn't going to walk away this time, outside. The sky had finally decided on blue, but Daniel had the feeling his weather was just beginning to change. The following Saturday morning, Daniel stood outside the small brick house Maya now called home. It wasn't far from the coast, the air carrying a faint scent of salt and pine. The neighborhood was quiet, lined with narrow sidewalks and small gardens blooming despite the chill in the air. He had been invited not warmly, not with any hint of the past they had shared, but with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to discuss the weather. If you're serious, come by at 10. We have plans. Those 5 words, "we have plans," had played on repeat in his head all week. When the door opened, it was Noah who greeted him. The boy's hair was slightly tousled, his t-shirt smudged with what looked like charcoal dust. His gaze held the same careful observation Daniel remembered from the cafe, like he was still deciding whether this man belonged in his world. "Mom's in the kitchen," Noah said, stepping aside. The house was nothing like Daniel's sleek, minimal apartment. This place felt lived in, sunlight spilling across stacks of books, a faint hum of music coming from somewhere in the back, the scent of coffee and something sweet in the air. On the wall, above a low bookshelf, hung a framed print of one of Maya's paintings, bold strokes of color, almost chaotic, yet balanced in a way that made the chaos feel intentional. Maya appeared in the doorway, her hair pulled back loosely, a wooden spoon in hand. "You're on time," she said, almost surprised. "I thought about being early," he replied, "but I didn't want to seem overeager." A corner of her mouth twitched almost a smile, but gone before it could settle. "We're going to the coastal trail. It's not far. Isla's been asking about the tide pools for weeks." Daniel nodded, but his eyes drifted to the table where Hila sat, legs swinging under her chair, coloring a page filled with seashells and starfish. She glanced up, met his eyes briefly, then returned to her work without a word. They left not long after, the 4 of them walking along a narrow dirt path that wound through tall grass toward the sound of waves. The air was crisp, the sky streaked with high white clouds. Daniel found himself walking beside Noah, who carried a small backpack that rattled faintly with every step. "What's in there?" Daniel asked. "Sketchbook, pencils, a jar for shells, and snacks. Mom says you should always have snacks." Daniel smiled faintly. "Your mom's right." When they reached the cliffs, the sea stretched endlessly before them, its surface shifting between silver and deep green. Below, the tide pools shimmered like scattered mirrors, each one holding its own little world. Hila darted ahead, crouching to peer into the nearest pool. Maya knelt beside her, pointing at something just under the surface. "See, that's a sea anemone." Gentle touch. Hila reached out cautiously, her fingers brushing the soft, waving tentacles. Her delighted laugh carried on the wind, and something in Daniel's chest tightened. He had been in countless boardrooms, on rooftops of buildings he'd designed, standing in moments that people called triumphant, but none of them felt like this quiet, unexpected warmth. Noah sat on a flat rock nearby, sketchbook open, his pencil moving quickly. Daniel eased down beside him. "Can I see?" The boy tilted the page toward him. He'd drawn the tide pools with surprising detail, the jagged rocks, the pools reflecting the sky, even the small shadow of Hila leaning over the water. "You're good," Daniel said honestly. "Better than I was at your age." "You draw?" Noah asked without looking up. "Not like this. My drawings are all straight lines and measurements." "That's still drawing," Noah said simply, as if the distinction didn't matter. A gust of wind sent a spray of salt water across the rocks, making Ela squeal and Maya laugh. Daniel turned toward the sound, and for just a moment, their eyes met across the distance. There was no accusation there, no lingering anger, just a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. By the time they made their way back, the sun was lowering, the sky shifting toward gold. Maya carried Ela, who had grown sleepy after the walk, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. Noah walked ahead, humming under his breath, his backpack heavier with shells. When they reached the house, Maya invited him in for coffee. Daniel accepted, though part of him knew this wasn't about the coffee. It was about showing up, proving bit by bit that he was willing to stay inside, while Maya settled Ela on the couch under a blanket. Daniel helped Noah arrange the shells on the kitchen table. The boy lined them up by size, then by color, changing the order twice before nodding with satisfaction. "They're all different," Noah said, "even if they look the same at first." Daniel looked at the shells, then at the boy. "Yeah," he said quietly, "they are." Maya returned, leaning against the doorway. "Thank you for coming today," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was something behind it, an acknowledgement, maybe even a small concession. "I'll come whenever you'll let me," Daniel replied. She studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't a closed door either. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel felt the faintest sense that maybe, just maybe, he could build something here. Not with blueprints or contracts, but with time, patience, and the truth he should have spoken long ago. As he left, the sun slipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared. Daniel didn't know what the next day would bring, but he knew this much: he wasn't walking away again. And that, he realized, might be the most important decision of his life. Daniel didn't sleep much that night. His mind replayed every moment, from the coastal trail, Noah's careful sketches, Ila's laughter when the tide splashed her, the way Maya had looked at him across the rocks without the sharpness he remembered from the night she left. There was no guarantee he'd ever get a second chance, but for the first time, he felt the fragile outline of one beginning to take shape. The next morning, he was in his office before sunrise, staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city in pale dawn light. His desk was buried in contracts, architectural drafts, and a string of urgent emails. But his focus kept drifting. For years, work had been his refuge, his excuse for avoiding everything personal. Now, it felt like the thing keeping him from the one place he actually wanted to be. He picked up his phone twice, each time setting it down before calling her. He knew better than to push. Maya wasn't someone who could be convinced with grand gestures or rehearsed words. If he wanted to be part of Noah and Ila's lives, he had to show up in ways that mattered to them, not to him. By midweek, he saw an opening. Maya had mentioned at the cafe that Ela loved painting, and that their local community center hosted art days for kids on Saturdays. Without overthinking it, he called and volunteered to help with the weekend session. The coordinator, surprised but pleased to have an extra pair of hands, agreed instantly. On Saturday morning, when Maya arrived with the children, she stopped short at the sight of him in the brightly lit art room, wearing an apron already streaked with blue paint. "You're here," she said, more as a statement than a question. "I am," he replied, handing Ela a set of clean brushes. "Thought I'd see if I could keep up." Ela beamed in a way she hadn't before, immediately pulling him toward a table covered in jars of paint and blank paper. "I'm making a whale," she announced, "a big one with a tail like this." She gestured so wide she nearly knocked over the water jar. Daniel steadied it with a quick hand. "Then we'd better make sure we have enough blue for the next hour." The room was filled with the sound of brushes on paper, the clink of paint, jars, and the occasional burst of laughter from the kids. Daniel worked beside Ela, carefully following her instructions about where the whale's fins should go, while Noah sat across from them sketching a lighthouse with precise, deliberate lines. Maya moved between tables, helping other children, but every so often Daniel caught her glancing over at them, not in judgment, more in quiet observation, as though she were trying to reconcile the man she had left with the one sitting there, paint on his hands, letting a 6-year-old direct his artistic choices. When the session ended, Ela proudly held up her whale, which had somehow grown into a full ocean scene, Can we hang it in my room?" she asked Maya. "Of course," Maya said, smiling. "It's beautiful." Hila turned to Daniel. "You have to come see it when it's on my wall." Daniel met Maya's eyes over Hila's head. There was a pause, but then Maya gave a small nod. "We'll see." Later that afternoon, Daniel found himself standing in the hallway of their home again. Hila had raced ahead to hang her painting, and Noah had gone to put away his sketchpad. That left him alone with Maya in the kitchen, where sunlight spilled through the window and caught in the loose strands of her hair. "You didn't have to come today," she said quietly. "I know," he replied. "I wanted to." She studied him, as if measuring the truth in his words. "You're different," she said finally. "But I can't tell if it's because you've changed or because you want something." Daniel didn't flinch. "Both. I want to be here. But I've also realized how much I lost when I let you walk away. I don't want to make the same mistake twice." Her gaze softened, just slightly. "If you're here for them, Daniel, if this is about being their father, even if it's not by title, then you need to understand something. They don't need perfection. They need presence. They need someone who shows up, even when it's inconvenient. Especially then." He nodded, the words settling into him with more weight than any boardroom advice he'd ever received. "I can do that. Time will tell," she said simply. Over the next few weeks, time did tell. He went with them to the farmer's market, carried bags while the kids picked out fruit, and let Hila talk him into tasting things he wouldn't have touched before. He sat beside Noah in the library, helping him find books on engineering and sketching, answering his endless questions about how buildings stayed standing. It wasn't fast, and it wasn't easy. Some days Noah barely spoke to him, retreating into the quiet of his drawings. Some days Hila seemed to forget he was there, chattering happily to her mother. But every now and then, there were moments small, fleeting, when Daniel felt the gap closing. One Sunday evening, as they walked back from the park, Hila slipped her hand into his without saying a word. He didn't look down, afraid she might pull away if he acknowledged it, but he felt her grip tighten as they crossed the street. When they reached the house, Noah lingered on the porch steps, his eyes flicking between Daniel and the door. "You're coming back next week?" he asked, not quite looking at him. "If you want me to," Daniel said. Noah hesitated, then nodded once. "Okay." It wasn't a grand declaration, but to Daniel, it was the start of something real. Maya must have seen it too, because as he turned to leave, she didn't say "we'll see this time." She just said, "Good night, Daniel." And there was no wall in her voice, only a cautious kind of warmth that hadn't been there in years. For the first time in a long while, Daniel felt like the foundation was being laid, not for a building, but for a life he'd thought he could never have again. And he was ready to keep building, no matter how long it took. The call came on a Thursday evening, just as Daniel was packing up his office. He'd been looking forward to the weekend. Maya had agreed to let him join them for a picnic at the cliffs, something she'd suggested herself for the first time. That small step had kept him going through a week of endless meetings and negotiations. But her voice on the phone wasn't the calm, measured tone he'd grown used to. It was taut, edged with something that made his grip on the receiver tighten. "Daniel, it's Noah," she said. The rest came out in quick bursts. There had been an incident at school. A boy twice Noah's size had shoved him hard enough to send him sprawling, and in the chaos, the sketchbook Noah carried everywhere had been ripped down the spine. He hadn't cried, not in front of anyone, but the teacher had called Maya after seeing the boy sitting on the steps outside, clutching the torn pages like a lifeline. "I've tried talking to him," Maya continued, "but he's shutting down. I don't know if it's just about the sketchbook or if something else happened. I'll be there," Daniel said without hesitation. When he arrived, the house was quiet. Maya met him at the door, her arms folded loosely, but the look in her eyes told him she was relieved to see him. "He's in his room," she said. "Hasn't come out since we got home." Daniel knocked gently on the half-open door. Noah was sitting cross-legged on the bed, pieces of paper spread around him like fragments of a broken puzzle. The sketchbook's cover lay on the floor, its spiral binding bent. "Hey," Daniel said softly, stepping inside. "Looks like you've been working on repairs." Noah didn't look up. "It's ruined." Daniel picked up one of the torn pages, a detailed pencil rendering of a city street, each building lined with precise windows and doorways. "You know," he said, "when I was your age, one of my first designs got caught in the rain. The ink ran so badly I couldn't tell if it was a house or a blob. I thought it was the end of the world." Noah glanced at him then, just for a second. "What did you do?" "I started over," Daniel said simply, "and the second one was better." The boy looked back at the pages scattered around him. "It won't be the same. You're right," Daniel agreed. "It'll be different, and maybe that's the point." They sat in silence for a while, Daniel helping him gather the torn pages into neat piles. When they'd finished, he said, "You know, I could take you to my office sometime, show you the drafting tools we use. You could start something new there." Noah hesitated, then nodded, just barely. It wasn't a smile, but it wasn't a no. When Daniel stepped back into the hallway, Maya was waiting. "Thank you," she said quietly. "He listens to you more than you realize." "I don't want to just be someone he listens to," Daniel replied. "I want to be someone he trusts." Over the next week, he made good on his offer. On Saturday morning, he picked up both Noah and Maya, letting them go without hesitation for the first time. At his office, Noah's eyes widened at the rows of drafting tables, the shelves stacked with models, the tall rolls of blueprint paper. Ela claimed a corner table for her own art studio, filling page after page with whales, dolphins, and a few creatures that looked suspiciously like unicorns wearing scuba gear. Noah, meanwhile, stood beside Daniel as he demonstrated how to use the drafting pens, how to scale measurements, how to think in dimensions. "You're teaching him to draw buildings?" Ela asked, peeking over. "No," Daniel said, smiling faintly. "I'm teaching him how to see them before they exist." For the rest of the afternoon, the three of them worked side by side. By the time Daniel dropped them back at the house, Noah had the beginnings of a new project, a tall lighthouse on a rocky shore, beams of light cutting through an imagined storm. Maya met them at the door. She looked at the drawing, then at Daniel. "He hasn't stopped talking about this all day," she said. That night, long after the kids had gone to bed, she called him. "I was wrong about something," she said without preamble. Daniel's hand tightened around his phone. "About what?" "You," she said simply. "I thought you were showing up because it was about me. But it's not, it's about them. And that matters." Her voice was quieter then, almost cautious. "If you want, you can come by tomorrow for dinner." It wasn't just an invitation, it was the first real sign of trust. When he arrived the next evening, the smell of roasted vegetables and fresh bread filled the house. They ate together, the four of them, laughter spilling into the spaces where silence had once lived. Afterward, Ela insisted on showing him her whale painting again, now framed on her bedroom wall, while Noah carefully stored his lighthouse sketch on his desk. Later, as Daniel helped clear the table, Maya glanced at him, over her shoulder. "You're fitting in here," she said softly, almost as if she didn't mean for him to hear. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took the plates to the sink, washed them, and set them to dry. Only then did he say, "That's all I want." In that moment, he realized something. He wasn't chasing redemption anymore. He was building something new, brick by brick, day by day. And for the first time in years, he wasn't afraid of how long it might take, because this time, he wasn't walking away. The knock at the door came just as the last light of evening was fading. Soft shadows stretching across the living room floor. Daniel had been sitting at the dining table, helping Noah review a set of measurements for his lighthouse sketch. Ela was sprawled on the rug nearby, humming to herself as she painted something she refused to show anyone yet. When the knock came, all three of them looked toward the door. Maya stepped out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her brow furrowed. She wasn't expecting anyone. Daniel stood, instinctively moving toward the door. But when he opened it, what he saw made him still for a moment. On the porch stood a man he didn't recognize, mid-40s, dressed in a weathered jacket, his face a mixture of hesitation and relief. And then, behind that man, came a familiar voice from the street. "Maya." The voice was deep, steady, but carried a tension Daniel had only heard in people holding back more than they wanted to admit. Maya's breath caught. Daniel glanced. back at her, and in that moment he understood this wasn't a stranger. This was someone from a chapter she rarely spoke about. It was Michael, Noah, and Isla's father. The air shifted instantly, thick with an unspoken history. The children froze, Noah's pencil dropping onto the table. Isla setting her brush down so slowly, it was as if the movement might change what she was seeing. "Michael," Maya said finally, her voice level but tight. What are you doing?" "Here." He stepped forward, but stayed just outside the threshold. "I needed to see the kids." His gaze flicked toward Daniel, then back to her. "And you?" Daniel didn't move, but his presence at the doorway was deliberate. He was giving her space to choose, but making it clear she wasn't facing this alone. The conversation that followed was careful, almost brittle. Michael explained that he'd been away for work far longer than he'd planned, that he'd been trying to get his life sorted. But his words didn't erase the years of absence, the birthdays missed, the silence that had settled over their family. Noah didn't speak at all, his jaw set. Isla shifted closer to her mother. Daniel noticed its small, instinctive movements that revealed more than words could. Eventually, Maya said, "You can come in, but we talk first." They sat in the living room, the kids upstairs under the guise of getting ready for bed. Though Daniel suspected both were listening from the top of the stairs, Michael glanced at him again, as if measuring his place in the picture. "And you are?" "Daniel," he said simply, "a friend." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was the right introduction for now. The talk went on for nearly an hour, circling around old wounds and tentative possibilities. Michael wanted to visit more often. Maya was cautious but didn't shut the door entirely. She was different now, stronger, more certain of where her boundaries were. Daniel saw that in every word she chose. When Michael finally left, the house felt heavier, as if everyone was waiting to exhale. Noah appeared first, standing in the hallway. "Is he coming back?" he asked, not looking at anyone in particular. "That depends," Maya said gently. "On him, and on you." Noah's eyes flicked toward Daniel, then back to his mother. "I don't know if I want him to." Daniel didn't say anything. This wasn't his answer to give. But the fact that Noah had looked at him before speaking, that meant something. Later, after the kids were in bed, Maya poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of him. They sat in the quiet, the low hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. "That wasn't easy," she said finally. "For you or for them?" he asked. "For all of us," she replied. Then, after a pause, "I'm glad you were here." He met her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere," and he meant it. Tonight had proved something not just to her, but to himself. He wasn't there because it was convenient, or because it felt good to be needed. He was there because he had chosen to stay, even when the past showed up at the door. Weeks later, the routine of their lives began to knit itself back together, but something had shifted. Michael had visited once more, this time for an afternoon at the park. It wasn't perfect. Noah kept his distance. Isla was cautiously curious, but it was a step. And Daniel was there too, not as a shadow on the sidelines, but as someone firmly woven into the day. One Sunday evening, as they walked back from the cliffs after the long postponed picnic, Isla slipped her hand into his without a word. Noah walked just ahead, the lighthouse sketch now complete in his backpack. Maya walked beside Daniel, their steps matching naturally. The wind carried the smell of the sea, the sound of waves against the rocks. Maya glanced at him, her eyes holding a quiet certainty. "You know," she said, "families aren't always built the way people expect. Sometimes they're built the way they're meant to be." Daniel smiled, not just at her words, but at the truth in them. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking for a place to belong. He was already home.